Thanks for joining us today. We've got a number of pieces of legislation that we continue to be very concerned about. Obviously, the COVID package, which is coming to the floor, we don't know either today or tomorrow. It's a real tragedy. When you look at that package, we know that the result of that package is going to be middle-class tax increases. We know for sure that it includes provisions that are not targeted, they're not temporary, they're not related to COVID, and it didn't have to be this way. We could have had a bill that was, a fraction of the cost of this one that could have gotten bipartisan approval and support, but the Speaker decided to go in another direction. And so we are going to be saddled with a burden, spending burden, and a tax burden that is really indefensible from the perspective of what it actually accomplishes. The other thing that we're focused on is what's going on at the border. And I watched this morning, I saw the White House Press Secretary, Jen Psaki, say that she was heartbroken by what's happening at the border. And to that I would say policy has consequences. When you say that you're not going to enforce our immigration laws, when you say that you're not going to build a border wall, it has consequences. And we're seeing the tragic consequences of that right now at the border. So we are going to be very focused as a conference on what's happening at the border, on working to make sure that as the Biden administration refuses to open schools, they have instead decided to open the border and to let in thousands of people potentially who have got COVID. You've got children at the border that have been separated again from their parents, and being heartbroken isn't a policy. So we expect to see action, and the American people expect to see action. Now with that, I'm going to turn things over to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Hudson, who's going to talk about Second Amendment issues and some of the gun control bills that are on the floor this week.
Thank you very much. I'm Richard Hudson, North Carolina's 8th Congressional District. I'm also the conference secretary. Listen, I'm a father of a 5-year-old who's in school. I care deeply about gun violence, and I'm proud that the Republicans in Congress are very serious about ending gun violence. Unfortunately, the Democrats in Congress are not serious about ending gun violence. And it's obvious by the bills they're bringing to the floor this week, which would do nothing to have stopped a single mass shooting in this country, yet they threaten the rights of law-abiding citizens. The Republicans, when we were in the majority, passed meaningful legislation, including the Fix NICS Act, which would have stopped the church shooting in Texas, like the 21st Century Cures Act, which had the most meaningful mental health reform in a generation and dealt with communicating with parents of children in crisis. We also passed the Stop School Violence Act, which put $1 billion into hardening schools, into getting mental health resources to schools, and also into training of law enforcement. I actually have legislation that I've introduced that will double the funding for the Stop School Violence Act. The Democrats have rushed 2 bills to the floor, no regular order, no hearing time. They have allowed no meaningful input from Republicans, and these bills, again, would have not stopped a single mass shooting. Not Newtown, not Charleston, not Parkland, not Las Vegas, not Sutherland Springs, would not have stopped the shooting of our former colleague Gabrielle Giffords because her shooter passed a background check. H.R. 8 fails to recognize the fact that every commercial gun sale in America requires a background check today. And H.R. 1446 creates delays for law-abiding citizens, could be indefinite, to acquire a weapon, and would not have closed the Charleston loophole. If you want to close the Charleston loophole, I direct you to Tom Rice's bill, H.R. 1518, which would, because the problem with the Charleston shooting was information sharing by law enforcement, and this bill allows that information sharing. Republicans have meaningful alternatives, and we have 6 bills that have been introduced last week and this week. We will be pushing to end gun violence. Our legislation would actually address this problem. The Democrats are concerned about taking away our Second Amendment rights, and the 2 bills this week will simply erode those rights. And so we're urging a no vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Now I'd like to introduce another member, the gentlelady from North Carolina, who's the Republican leader of the Education and Workforce Committee, Ms. Fox.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The Democrats will have you believe that their radical PRO Act protects the right to organize. All it does is protect the $1.6 billion that the labor unions donate to support left-wing organizations. While trying to garner support for this outrageous bill, I've heard Democrats argue that it's the unions that built the middle class. No, the unions didn't build the middle class. Entrepreneurs and individual workers in this country built the middle class. And what this bill does is take away their freedom, making unions bigger and the individual freedom smaller. There are too many harmful provisions to list in this bill, so I'll highlight some of the more egregious ones. It overturns 27 states' right-to-work laws. It eliminates employees' rights to a secret ballot, allows unions to boycott and picket nearly every business in America, whether they're subject to a union vote or not. The bill reinstates destructive Obama-era regulations, includes California's controversial AB 5 with 0 exemptions, which will deprive millions of Americans the opportunity to work independently and start their own businesses. This provision is particularly ill-advised since many Americans during COVID, like working parents, are taking advantage of the flexibility the independent contracting model offers. At a time when employers and workers are forced to tighten their purse strings, it's unconscionable that Democrats are pushing a bill that would take millions from workers' paychecks and employers. It also forces workers to hand over their private personal information to a union. AFL-CIO President Trumka testified last Congress that unions will be able to go after workers, quote, in the grocery store and at their homes. This is not the way America operates. This personal information could very well be shared with third parties, subjecting workers and their families to even more unwanted attention and harassment. The bill increases the risk of union corruption and wrongdoing. Federal investigators recently finished their investigation of the UAW, where senior union leaders embezzled workers' hard-earned union dues for personal expenses. Don't forget, federal law already protects employees' right to organize, and Republicans respect this right. Any reforms to the U.S. labor laws should help workers, not union bosses. Now's not the time to reward union bosses and liberal activists with political favors. Our focus should be on reopening schools and rebuilding the economy so all Americans have the opportunity to succeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Virginia. And now we have one of our new members from Iowa, Ashley Henson, who's going to talk about legislation she has to restore our schools, get schools back open again.
Thank you. Sure, Liz. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, Ashley Henson from Iowa's 1st District, and I come to you today as a working mom of 2 school-aged kids. We need to get our schools back open. When I look at the last year, it's been quite the year, and the toll we've faced, especially when it comes to our young people, is staggering. The mental health visits for our young people as young as 5 are increasing at a dramatic pace. They're ending up in our emergency rooms. You know, when I look at why kids need to be in school, it's more than reading, writing, and arithmetic. It's for the social interaction. It's for the stable environment that they can be in. They need to maybe get out of a violent situation. They might be looking for that next meal. The kids need to be back in school. We're now hearing as well that there are additional challenges where we're finding students have fallen off the grid. We don't know where these students are. They've gone missing. Simply stopped logging on for virtual school. That's unacceptable. Teachers don't know where they are, and the fact that they've fallen off the grid is entirely abhorrent as a working mom. School enrollment is also dropping. Now that we're 1 year into this pandemic, it's quickly turning into 2 for many school districts around the country, and I think it's just it's really sad that we're letting our kids fall through the cracks here, which is why we need to make sure that we are getting our schools back reopened. It's exactly why I introduced the Reopen Schools Act, which basically would set some parameters around the $54 billion in money that's already been appropriated by Congress before I even got here, to make sure that schools have a plan to get reopened. They submit that plan to their governor, and then they actually follow through and reopen their schools. The Democrats, I want to point out, blocked this for the 4th time last night. So 4 times they've chosen to make our kids political. The Biden administration has no meaningful strategy to move forward. Getting kids into school, I'm sorry, I'm going to take this down. That's better, sorry. 1 day a week at this point is just unacceptable, and our kids should not be a political football. And to keep moving the goalposts here, the kids are the ones that are losing this game. So when I look at examples of how we can lead on this issue, look to the state of Iowa. We have prioritized our kids and our teachers in getting back to school safely in the state of Iowa. It can be done. Iowa's a great model for that. So I would encourage the Biden administration to look to the state of Iowa and how we've made sure that we can get kids back in the classroom safely. Republicans are going to continue to lead on this issue, so what I would invite is all my Democrat colleagues to join us. Let's make sure we have a plan to get those schools reopened and get kids back in the classroom. Thank you very much.
And now we're going to hear from our whip, Mr. Scalise.
Thank you. Good morning. Good to see all of you. If you look at the House schedule this week, it's yet one more example of Speaker Pelosi pushing a socialist agenda that's focused on taking away the rights of hardworking families while also bankrupting the next generation with mountains of debt that are focused not on COVID relief. If you look over 90% of the bill that they're going to bring back on the spending, a $1.9 trillion spending bill, is not focused on COVID relief. It's focused on pushing more of the far left agenda. It's very concerning when you look at both what happened in the House and in the Senate. Speaker Pelosi and Chuck Schumer shut Republicans out of the process completely. In fact, President Biden was offered the ability to work with Republicans, and he chose to have a go-it-alone strategy as well. And that lets Americans down all across this country who wanted to see a package that was focused on helping families, on helping small businesses stay afloat, and on helping reopen schools. We brought amendments, for example, to double the number of vaccines so that we could get more Americans vaccinated quickly, and that was rejected on a party line vote. There was an amendment in the Senate to say that felons in prison shouldn't be able to get taxpayer checks, and that was voted down on a party line vote. So clearly, when you look at the priorities of Speaker Pelosi, it's to spend as much money as quickly as possible on her socialist agenda and to turn her backs on those of us who want to work together to confront this virus and to safely reopen our economy and our schools. You can just look at the crisis on the border. It's a major, major national scandal. Jay Johnson, the Obama Homeland Security Secretary, once said that if there were 1,000 or more illegal crossings, that was a bad day. Today we're seeing 3,000 or 4,000 illegal crossings a day at our southern border. It is a national crisis, and it needs to be confronted by President Biden, and he refuses to acknowledge this. There are super spreader caravans coming across our southern border. I think it's an interesting misplaced priority that the Biden administration's agenda is to open America's borders and close America's schools. This is the wrong approach. This is not focusing on the hardworking families of this country. The science says that the schools should be open now. Every school should be open, teaching kids in the classroom, and every day they refuse to do that, it's setting those kids back even further. Millions of American kids are being denied the ability to learn and to be able to compete. And the science is clear that the schools should be reopened. Again, we put more money. Ashley Henson's bill was offered up during the process of moving this bill forward to say if schools get more money, it has to be to reopen so that kids could be learning in the classroom. And it was rejected by every Democrat, which begs the question, what do they need this money for if it's not to reopen schools during this pandemic? And so, again, we're going to continue to fight for those hardworking families. We're going to continue to fight to reopen schools safely, to follow the science, not the union bosses. When you see a union boss fighting to keep the public schools closed while taking the parents' money, but sending their own kids to private schools, it just shows you they're not even following the science. There's a tremendous amount of hypocrisy and double standard involved in the people that want to take a hard-earned money of these taxpayers across the country while not fighting for them, for their families, for their children. So we're going to continue to do that. We're going to continue to try to fight for an agenda that works for families, not to push this socialist agenda that Nancy Pelosi is bringing to the floor.
Hey guys, did you know we have a podcast called WJ Live?
The Western Journal's mission is to equip readers with the truth, and that's the same mission we have on WJ Live.
You'll hear from writers, editors, and special guests on the most important topics of the day.
You can watch us every day at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific on youtube.com/WJ Live.
While you're there, help us out by subscribing and hitting the bell so you don't miss any future episodes. See you there.